Salutations, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland, continuing my series about Germany 1918 to 45. I'm examining anti-Semitic policy under the Nazis. So I talked about how the one-day boycott of Jewish shops and businesses failed in 1933. There was a difficulty in defining what was a Jewish shop or business. Now, some shops or businesses were completely owned by a Jewish family. Some were part-owned. There might be several partners in a business. And almost invariably, most of the employees were not Jewish. So these people were being affected as well. The Nazis' policy had not been well thought through. Anyway, there was a law for the restoration of professional civil service, and Hitler wished to sack all the Jewish civil servants. But President von Hindenburg intervened, and he said those civil servants who were frontline soldiers in the First World War must be exempted. Now, there was obviously a limit to von Hindenburg's decency, because he should have saved all the Jewish civil servants. Surely this ethnic or religious prejudice was rebarbative. So that's what he did. Why didn't he go all the way? Was he a tiny bit anti-Semitic himself? Possibly. Or was he felt that would be ultra vires? But he did speak out against Nazi and anti-Semitism, saying, German citizens of the Jewish faith should not be mistreated. Incidentally, the main Jewish organization in Germany at the time was called the Association of Germans of the Jewish Faith, because many Jewish Germans regard themselves as being primarily German and Jewish afterwards. The community had been there for centuries. There were some Jewish people who were completely assimilated, who would go to a synagogue once a week, but apart from that, were just typically German in their clothing. Obviously, German was their mother tongue and all the rest of it. They lived and breathed German culture. They were very well integrated, had German friends, and were sometimes married to Gentiles. So there were quite a few who were half Jewish or quarter Jewish, and so on. Now, at the other end of the scale were ultra-Orthodox Jews who were completely isolated, deliberately, and they wore the clothing of 17th century Poland, and they had very long beards, and they kept very strictly to kosher butchering and all the rest of it, and they studied the Torah and had lots of children and didn't engage with mainstream German society. Now, most German Jews were somewhere in between the two. And that was another difficulty for the Nazis is, as I say, some Jewish people in Germany were so much part of mainstream community and had friends and neighbors. Himmler in the Second World War gave a speech about this, saying, the trouble is everybody's got one Jewish person whom he really likes, saying, oh yes, I'm anti-Semitic, but this Jewish person is first class, must not be mistreated. And Himmler said, oh, we mustn't make exceptions for any individuals. Anyway, so the Nazis, they ramped up anti-Semitic policy, partly because they believed in it, also a way of satisfying some of the most bigoted members. Some people joined the Nazis because they wanted to get back territory in the East with a German majority, or they thought Versailles was unfair, they didn't want to pay reparations, or they thought democracy was chaos, things like that. Some of the less unreasonable policies, and some of them obviously extremely malicious and wanted to kill Jewish people. But anyway, anti-Semitic policy was a way of throwing some red meat to some of the most malicious bigots in the party. So 1935, the Nuremberg laws were promulgated, so-called because they were announced at Nuremberg. Remember, that's in the center of Germany, a bit to the south. And that's where they held their big rallies in early September, these outdoor meetings. So they were drafted by Dr. Joseph Goebbels and signed into law by Rudolf Hess. So the theme for the rallies was freedom, ironically. They were taking away freedom from Jewish people and, to an extent, Gentiles as well. It was mainly concerned with marriage and sexual relations between Aryans, that's Germans and similar ethnic groups, and this was banned between them and Jewish people. As in, if you're a Swedish person or a Dane or something living in Germany, you were also considered an Aryan. Anyone even seen holding hands, a man and a woman, would be suspected of breaking this law and could be sent to a concentration camp. And Jewish families couldn't employ a German woman as a maid of childbearing age, the idea being that they might rape her or something. So it's a very insulting presumption built into the law. So Nazi propaganda was really vicious. It defamed the Jewish community, accusing them of being child molesters and so on, and oh, you mustn't let your child be treated by a Jewish doctor or have a Jewish teacher anywhere near your child. So this was really vile anti-Semitic propaganda they were pumping out. So obviously the Nazis did not allow Jewish people to join their party. Should go without saying it's so obvious. The state aid programs excluded Jewish people, as in winter help, giving free fuel to pensioners, the Strength Through Joy movement. So the state propaganda was softening up the German public opinion for the Holocaust. It's questionable whether the Nazis always planned to try and annihilate the Jewish community. So anti-Semitic policy went through 4 stages: vilification, separation, relocation, and extermination. So vilification is when they start demonizing the Jewish community, depicting them as monsters, as being hideous, as being guilty of all manner of foul crimes. And then second of all, by separating them from the mainstream community by saying they're not allowed to go to schools or hospitals or parks or participate in sports and blah, blah, blah. They have to live in certain streets. And this is recreating the ghetto. In the early 19th century, the ghetto had been ended. That's another point. It was Napoleon who had got rid of a lot of anti-Semitic laws in Germany when he conquered most of Germany around about 1800. Napoleon, who was viciously anti-black, was actually quite pro-Jewish. So some German people who'd fought against the French when Napoleon was around said, well, the Jewish people, they must be traitors because that's why Napoleon was good to them. And some Jewish Germans had the surname Schönteil, which is a translation of Bonaparte as Napoleon's surname. But that's by the by. Now, Jewish children being excluded from school, having to go to Jewish-only schools, some of them welcomed that, partly because they were being so badly verbally abused and indeed physically bullied at school. Because of Nazi propaganda, not just by other pupils, but by teachers who are leading this mistreatment of the Jewish pupils. Anyway, so a lot of German Jews left the country. Then came Kristallnacht. 9th of November 1938 was the anniversary of the Beer Hall Putsch and indeed of the Kaiser's abdication. So Goebbels was in Hitler's bad books. He was having an extramarital liaison with Leda Barova, a Czech actress. Magda Goebbels, that's Joseph Goebbels' wife, was one of the few women whom Hitler actually liked and respected, not suggesting there was a romantic liaison going on there. But anyway, then from Goebbels' point of view, it was a gift from the heavens. Herschel Grinspan, a Polish Jew in Paris, he shot dead a German diplomat, Ernst von Rath. That's because all the Jewish people who were Polish citizens were expelled from Germany at this time, about 10,000 of them. And so Grinspan's parents had been kicked out. He was angry at the way his parents had been treated, so went to the embassy and shot dead von Rath. There is a theory there was something else to it, that they were having a homosexual liaison, or this was some sort of tiff, that von Rath was gay and known as Notre Dame de Paris because of that. Grinspan was also only 17 at the time. Anyway, so Goebbels said, all right, well, let's orchestrate a wave of anti-Semitic attacks, and had SA and SS men dressed in civilian clothes and attack Jewish businesses and houses all over Germany, smashing windows was the least they did. Some people were beaten to death. At least 100 Jewish men were murdered that night. About 10,000 Jewish people were sent to concentration camps. A ruinous fine was levied on the Jewish community, and a law was promulgated to say that the insurance industry did not have to pay out for all the vandalism inflicted on Jewish-owned property. That was that. So it was Goebbels seeking to get back into Hitler's good books. He gave a speech at a Beer Hall Putsch rally to urge this wave of vicious attacks, and it was meant to be a spontaneous outburst of public rage. And as one Nazi official said, last night the national soul boiled over. So that was that. It obviously increased Jewish emigration, but to be allowed out, people had to pay a huge fine, and they were only allowed to take a very small amount of their property or money with them. So that was that. So Jewish people were moving to Switzerland in some cases because it was also a German-speaking country. Austria, no point going there because by March 1938 that was also part of the Third Reich. Going to nearby places like like the Netherlands or Denmark with similar languages, in some cases the United Kingdom, occasionally Ireland, the United States. But this was the time of the Great Depression. There was no international convention on refugees. It was very difficult to be allowed into other places. Some people moving to South Africa, for example. Some Jewish Germans wished to go to Australia, but the government said, we have got no racial problem, we don't wish to import one. So Australia was rather unwelcoming as well. Anyway, so Kristallnacht is an example of one of Hitler's subordinates acting on his own initiative, working towards the Führer. It was all building up towards the final solution. So how many Jewish people had been murdered in Germany by the time the Second World War broke out? Not a huge number, it's in the hundreds. Obviously, even a single murder for anyone's ethnicity or faith is an abomination. But what I'm simply stating is the matter of scale. It was about to get hugely worse.